Hello and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a podcast or a video series that you might be watching with your eyes or your ears on the topic of designing better miniature games. And oh my goodness, a lot of new miniature games got designed recently. And you can discover this fact by going to a Rule of Carnage Discord and looking at the sprouting channels of the One Box Wargame Challenge that our mate from over the way, Malev, created about 2 months ago. And since then, more than 100 games have blossomed forth from the minds and keyboards of game designers. And I think today we are going to continue talking about some random selections of these creations. There are too many for us to talk about in total. So Glenn has been good enough to take his fickle D20 of fate and roll a few times to give us each 3 games to examine. We talked about 3 last week. And this week we are going to deal with, it just happens that we rolled 3 games that all share a characteristic. And of course, if you're thinking about one box war games where the challenge is take a single box of miniatures and develop a rule system that you can use to play with that single box of miniatures, and the whole thing is sort of self-contained. The name of the challenge, One Box War Games, sort of war games there contains some loaded meanings. Some people it's tweezers and picking up pieces of cardboard, and for other people it's getting a tape measure out and measuring the line of sight between 2 space marines. I think a lot of the games, it's fair to say, have been non-discrete miniature games and have involved tape measures. But the 3 of the ones that we ended up rolling are not. They are discrete. They're the kind of game with grids, with squares, with spaces. In fact, one has hexes. Are these miniature games? Of course they are. They use miniatures. Does using a grid invalidate their entry into the competition? No, measuring was not specified. But that's fun. So let's talk about 3 grid-based, exciting one-box war games. And I think, Glenn, you've got 2, so you better go first.
Yes. So yeah, just generally, I found it. I've also been trying to go down the list of the games, just like privately giving people feedback, and I don't know if it's pure coincidence we rolled half discrete and half non-discrete. It feels at the moment like the grid-based ones are a little bit. It doesn't feel 50-50 to me, so this might just be pure chance, but I think it's really interesting. So one of the ones that I got to look at was Crazykoala Rampage.
Fantastic name.
Which is based on one of the Infinity boxes of minis, which are like 2 dudes and 4 little sort of robot koala things. So the game is basically,
just before you move on, like that is, I think that's been a really fun, like, general observation about the one box war games is people trying to decide whether they go for sort of civil war type situations where you've got one box of one kind of miniatures and you figure out a reason why they're all fighting. Spoilers, that's where I've gone. Or people are like, oh, this has got 2 kinds of miniatures in that look really different. Let's do a thing where we use these 2 kinds of miniatures. That's awesome.
I mean, generally, it's, Manav it was a really smart idea, the one box war game thing, because it is instantly a design challenge of which way do you go? Do you go solo? Because solo's like totally legit. You've got a single force and you're like dealing with a unseen enemy.
Literally in the case of the one that's like a predator and like one of the monster you're fighting is literally not represented by a miniature.
Absolutely. Or like with my game where there are no enemies and you're sort of just dealing with something that's going on. Do you go like 2 forces in a civil war? Do you try and find a way to differentiate the forces? It's been really interesting seeing people deal with the idea of designing a game around a box that doesn't have necessarily have 2 definitive forces in it, and also seeing people try to decide between, shall I try and pick a box that has an obvious sort of narrative to it, or shall I pick a box of things I just think are cool? Because it very much, like when Crazykoala Rampage popped up and they said they were using this box of minis from Infinity, several people did pop up with, I've always wanted to buy that box. but I've never had a purpose for, because there's a lot of these little weird robot koalas,
Yeah, they're almost like sort of surveillance koalas, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
they're very sinister, but also very cute.
Yeah, so that one really felt like someone going, I don't know that this is a good idea to design a game around this,
But
but
this
I
is my
want
moment, finally.
yeah, I now have an excuse to buy this thing and own some
Yes,
robo
love it.
koalas.
That's
Um,
literally my main reason for designing games. So I fully subscribe to that justification for starting a new rule system.
so I don't know how much of the grid based designs are something to do with a certain Chess 28 manifesto.
Oh, could
But
be. Yeah, it could
but
be.
this one is on an 8x8 grid.
Mm-hmm.
One force one person takes the four koalas who are like escaped in a robo koala factory,
Mm-hmm.
sets up on one side, and the other force takes the two humans and a couple of little terminals and sets up on the other side. And the humans are trying to grab the koalas before the koalas can smash the terminals, and one assumes escape to robo koala freedom. And it has a card-based
Quite
movement.
politically charged in that way.
Yeah, possibly. So you have a little deck of
Who's
like
really the bad guy?
who's the real villain here. You get a deck of custom cards with little sort of Tetris piece movement things on them,
Mm-hmm.
and you draw a certain number each round, and then you can assign them to any of your dudes, like three/6 at a time. And you move around the table, and it's all sort of quite, jolly, figuring out how to use your cards, and etc. etc. Yeah, like this is one that I actually physically play tested, because it is ironic. I'm not like, design wise, I'm personally not inspired by designing grid based games.
Mm-hmm.
I'm perfectly happy to play a grid based game. And ironically, possibly with the challenge, it's quicker to draw out a grid on a bit of paper and get some blocks on it. Because I think, for me personally, the thing about grid based games is, and this is just totally, I think, a taste thing. I know all tabletop games are abstracted. Grid based games become, for me, immediately way more abstracted
Yeah, I
than
think that's fair.
non-grid based games. And so I felt like totally fine with just drawing it on like a half A4 piece of paper, getting Euro cubes, and just going and just like, I literally sat at the desk in front of my keyboard and ran like 3 or 4 playtests of this one. Whereas like a discrete minis game, I feel like I wouldn't be able to do that because I have to
You sort of
physically
almost
measure.
wouldn't disrespect the game by
Well, just the
boiling
relative.
it down to like a tiny A5 piece of paper with cubes on it.
Well, just inherently, like, converting the distances, there's a
Yeah.
point where it becomes simply unmanageable to do it. Whereas
Yeah.
when you've got discrete games, it's not an issue, because as long as the cube is somewhere within. So I've got a bit of paper I can do an 8x8 grid on. Yeah, I can give that a test. So in
Mm-hmm.
that way, doing the grids, I think, is really smart. Um, I think personally, grids are really tricky because their discrete nature means the game, I think, has to be a bit sharper, and has to be a little bit tighter and a little bit more challenging. Um,
I would agree with that. Yep.
Particularly with Crazykoala Rampage being a very asymmetrical game where the koalas have got to come in to claim the terminals, and the attendants have got to defend them.
Mm.
I did find that after, like, to be fair, on the first playthrough it was like really tight and really close. By the third test, I was like, yeah, the supervisors got it locked down. Actually, if I do this certain set of things, I reckon they've got it like locked away. But that's
Yeah, and do you perceive that, like, when you've got a grid, because you've got this limited discrete range of possible moves, like computing out how to win, it's just feasible. Whereas if you've got a set of uh non-discrete infinite range of movements, and like some ways of like moving or obstructing, or things that slow things down or speed things up, like you just end up with the interest lies very much in the positions, because there are lots of possible positions, whereas here you've got 64 possible positions. There's only a certain number of things. I mean, even as I say that out loud, it's ridiculous. Like, chess hasn't stopped being interesting for a great swathe of people, but chess has very crisp rules.
Yes, chess is very crisp. I think like one of the things that's tricky about a grid as a design challenge is that because you've got like corners and edges that regularly get used to a significant degree, it's potentially quite easy for someone to castle up. So this is the thing with the Crazykoala Rampage game specifically, because the supervisors can place the terminals anyway. They can stick a terminal in the corner, group up around the terminal, and just castle in that corner, and they can't be like flanked or surrounded. Whereas,
Right.
like in a non-discrete game, the corners of the table basically don't get used. They're like really way off and an obscure sort of position to be in. And so I think it's easier to avoid like full castling back to the wall than it is in a grid game. I think there's a whole bunch of challenges, and I think like I don't know, because I don't know how much it'd take to tighten it up, because it's like one of my favorite games ever is Onitama, which is a grid-based game with card-based like Tetris style movement. So it's like
I don't know it.
it's a really, 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 really lovely game. Basically, you have like a kung fu master and his students, and you start the game. There are 3 cards that give you the grid of movement. One person has 2 of them, one has 1. The person with 2 of them gets first turn, uses one of them to move his students around, and then gives it to the other player. And the player picks one of the 2 cards he now has to move his students, and then gives that card he's just used back to the other player. And you do that round and round and round. So it means that like every move that you make changes what your opponent has available to him, and you can win by taking the opponent's pieces or by like claiming his dojo by getting onto a certain space. And it really is one of those games which feels like, you know, this could be one of those sort of eternal games. But anyway, aside from waxing lyrical about that, that is a game that I think is like super tight and has been refined by the people making it. I personally, I wouldn't do the reason I wouldn't do a grid game is I think it's harder to get a grid game singing in 2 months than it is to get a non-grid game at least narratively interesting within that same period of time. Because it's really hard for a grid-based game to be like telling a narrative story. It has, because it is to me that much more abstract, it has to work as an abstract, like challenging puzzle thing. But yeah, I mean, look, I played it more than I've played any of the other games that I've read for the challenge, and I did enjoy sort of, you know, figuring out my degenerate strategy, which is definitely a certain sort of fun. And you
Provided you with a certain kind of gamer's pleasure.
yeah. And you know, you could totally sort of, if you've got a chessboard and you've got the you know, picked up the Robo Koalas package, you could totally have like 3 or 4 very jolly games with this for a friend. I think what's interesting, because it's like it made me think a bit of Half and Taffel, the Viking chess game, because that's a super asymmetrical chess-like game. And the thing I found about playing Half and Taffel a few times is you go through like tides of which is the better side to play between 2 players who know each other very well. Like, you know, if there's somebody that you sort of particularly learn the game with, and you play like 10 or 20 games with them, you'll start off with you both being like, oh no, that side always wins, that side's really overpowered. And then after a few games, that'll change, and you'll start saying that about the other end, and then it will go back and forth as you both like learn the game. And so I do wonder a little bit whether it's like, okay, well, I'm 4 or 5 games into playing Crazykoala Rampage, and I'm pretty sure one of the sides has an unbeatable degenerate strategy. maybe if I played another like human being and we learned the game together after like after another 10 games, we'd be like, oh no, 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 the koalas have an unbeatable degenerate strategy. That cannot be defeated. And then you have to raise yourself to like grandmaster level playing of Crazykoala Rampage. But yeah, it's definitely I think a really interesting way to take on the design challenge. And a yeah, cool fun game, and I had a good time fiddling around with it. So
Well, nice. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation because that's given me two further games to go and examine because I haven't played Half and Favel or Onitama. So
Onitama, yes. Well, I've got them both, so feel free to
nice. All right.
borrow.
Put on those on our big chalkboard of things to try.
So you picked up well you got randomly assigned a hex based game, and this is one that I like had a good look at because it did really appeal to me on the first read through of it. Do you want to
Right.
talk
Yeah. So
about that?
speaking about grid based Far Eastern martial arts, we have Hakkiyoi, which is essentially sumo wrestling on a hex grid, the same size and shape as a Settlers of Catan map. It's just what it looks like to me. So it's five hexes wide, and it's in a sort of hexagon shape. And you got two, and it's kind of similar insofar as you've got a hand of cards, and you need to set some cards to sort of secretly decide what you're doing. And what's cool is that you've got a pair of cards, which is basically a sort of where you are moving and what is the move, what's the action you're going to take, which are called move cards and technique cards. And so, having not played it, it looks like you've got a sort of guessing and bluffing situation where you want to circle around the other guy and pair the right sort of form of attack, grapple, slap, push with the right sort of move so that you get into the right orientation. Um, and that to me seems really intriguing. I don't know how much kind of information there is on the table to kind of figure out what tells there are and stuff. So yeah, and it's interesting because when I was looking at the sort of rock paper scissors nature of the techniques, I was thinking, oh, is there a place where if he pushes but I've slapped, like I get the advantage, and so he knows he's going to push. So I don't know, like it seems to be that there isn't that sort of rock paper scissors. There's more I want to step out the way. I want to make sure that I'm presenting uh the wrong position.
Mm,
And the game has random stats for speed, strength, bulk, and skill, which is
mm,
kind of intriguing. So it sort of says, here's a very crunchy, sort of, potentially razor sharp, small scale grid based game, but then just like tip some sort of randomness into it to sort of shake it up, which I think is intriguing. You don't tend to see that kind of thing in abstract games for
mm,
like, for pretty like I don't know, for pretty good reasons, which is like if your system is going to be very tightly balanced about, as you were saying, like if there's a very limited space of movements and what I do and what you do like massively swings the situation, to then pour some dice on top of it feels like this is two unusual ingredients coming together. And so there's a roll at the beginning where you get D3 of a resource called Fighting Spirit, and that one of the playtesters in the channel had pointed out that it kind of felt like whoever won that roll just won the game because you had, I think it allows you to reroll attacks. It allows you to get an advantage in the initiative roll for each round, and it also allows you to offset a sort of fatigue mechanic that happens at the end of each round. Um, so yeah, this is like, the traditional approach to this would be like everyone gets exactly the same things. It's a perfect information. It's like there's lots of information available, but now we've introduced this sort of hidden declaration of movements, and that provides something interesting. So yeah, I think in this case, I haven't played it, and I'm intrigued to because I think that the tight movement and counter movement thing is super interesting, and you build up a thing called momentum. I think if you manage to get a situation where you were going to move a long way, but they stand in the way, then you get the rest of that movement as momentum, which is a bonus to you. which yeah, like my comment on that was like kind of feels like the opposite of what I'd expect, which is the more I move, the more momentum I build up. But
Yeah,
anyway, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I had a little look at this one because like sumo, I think, is an inherently interesting like mid game design challenge. And like a few times we've talked about what a one mini per side war game could look like.
Mm-hmm.
And a few times I've thought, I think maybe the answer would be something like sumo wrestling, where one person tries to drive forward, and because the other person has stepped round, like relative positioning is so important, and the thing of like, well, I can see you, therefore I can shoot you, and you want to be able to shoot me, so we just stand there looking at each other and shooting each other, which is
Right. Yeah. There's a reason that gunfights in westerns only last one bullet or two bullets, I should say, because
yeah, no,
that's how long they're interesting for.
yeah. Well, the challenge of like two single miniatures with guns is I want to do to you exactly what you want to do to me, so we just get sight of each other and then blast away until somebody gets a headshot. Whereas something like sumo, where it's like, okay, well, we both want to be grappling each other, but then we're going into this sort of like backwards and forwards thing of, well, I'm going to try and grab you, but what you're doing is you're stepping around and you're on the wrong side of me now, and so the values of all these things changes. It's something that I inherently think is really interesting, and I think that they've taken sort of an interesting approach to it with the hex grid.
Mm-hmm.
um, Weirdly,
Yeah, and because the hex grid gives you enough positional changes that it feels chunky and like you're moving around each other
hmm,
without having too much like fiddling. Like honestly, making a non-discrete version of this would be kind of irritating and fiddly, and you would be like, oh, I wish this was on a hex grid. So I think the choice is really good.
yeah. My default like way of doing it would be like going to templates,
Yeah.
that literally like clip in around each model, and it's kind of trying to make it
But because
just
in often
screen.
cases these models are like rotating around each other.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting way that he sort of looked at the challenge for it. I do think I fundamentally agree with you. I'm more interested in the bluffing thing than random dice rolls. I kind of want all the randomness in it to be about the bluffing and the card mechanics and the did I guess what you were going to do, rather than like a bit to do with dice and a bit to do with like initiative orders and
Yeah, so I should say the resolution system it's a good resolution system. It's a roll a d20. The top is your skill and the bottom is their skill or something. So it creates this range, this like Goldilocks range. And if you roll too high, then or too low, um, and then if it's an opposed roll, you have to land in the Goldilocks roll and be higher than the other person. All of which is great. The question is this the right place for that kind of a system? um, or is this better to be like, well, actually, what we've got is more like a slightly two-dimensional, like we've got a two-axis rock paper scissors, and so we've created this quite interesting possibility space, which if I kind of see what's coming and plan one or two moves ahead, then I outplay you and there's no randomness. But then I guess that's partly like looking at it, it just sort of said abstract game with sumo miniatures, but that's not what this actually is. This is a much more beer and pretzels thing, and I think that's what's you know it's tricky to sort of like I don't know what your man Francesco has designed before. Like, is this his first rule book? Is this his first attempt at a game? Is this is this something he does lots and it's often his hobby? But like, I don't want to criticize this. These are brilliantly assembled and very, I don't know, very idiosyncratic. It caught my attention immediately. There's lots of loveliness going on. Like when we're leveling these sort of thoughts, it's more like, if you were if this was getting ready to be published, then you really need to be thinking about these sorts of things. And that's lovely to even be able to tackle that, because there's a lot of
I mean,
interesting stuff at its heart.
yeah, I mean, I think the thing is inherently like, the vast majority of these are basically first iterations of the game. And it's like, I've never done anything where the first iteration of it, didn't have some clunking problems, and like,
Yes, but for the reader at home, Glenn and I played one of my like 15th iteration of something over the weekend, and all of the wheels fell off and it set on fire. So,
yeah, and
it's
it's
just
like,
this crap's hard.
yeah. I mean, the fact that these games are as non-broken as they are, is astounding, and everyone's done amazing jobs. And there's not one of these games that I'm not deeply impressed by. And this is the fact that we're able to go like, well, I don't know. I'm wondering about what the design goals of the sort of the idea, and whether the narrative pays out, and whether this is a good system in the wrong game is insane. It's insane
Yeah,
that they're able to
and
make
and
this
I think
level of like,
to put a specific point on this, like it would be completely acceptable for Francisco to turn around and say, "There's no way I'm making this an abstract game. That is not the point of this game. Like, I want this to feel like we are sort of swinging around and moving and jostling, and it's never quite sure how it lands. And the luck in one is mitigated by the fact that we play 5 rounds, and I wrote it so that it's fun. And like he can say all those things, and that can be fine because this is art, and you have a specific texture in mind, and
yeah,
great, you'll find people who want that as a game experience versus the abstract you know uh, different flavor. It's just
yeah, no,
taste.
totally. I've got a game called Sumo Gnomes, which is
Why
a
have I not heard about sumo gnomes before? This is excellent.
it's a game I've got. It's one of a game I kickstarted by a guy that I know designed it, and it's basically, it's a dice based game, and the dice, you have a dice to represent your little gnome, and it's played on a beer mat, and it's like totally a pub game. And that suggests like sitting around a table with like 6 mates and playing like a tournament, because like every game takes about 4 or 5 minutes, and it's very
Right.
much that sort of quick beer and pretzels, dice rolling, it's meant to be like gnomes sumo wrestling on tree stumps, and you switch someone around and bung them off the tree stump in a couple of minutes, and it's like, that's definitely a super fun, cool experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then like this sort of version of the game where you hear like a like, sort of Japanese music in the background as two people like eyeball each other, and you mutter quietly and make it's like, there's so many different ways any of these games can work. And one of the things about the challenge that's so interesting is like being able to get to some point of refinement towards the end point, but it's so difficult to like to get there within the time available.
Mm-hmm.
So the last of the games that we're going to talk about, because by the time this video posts, the challenge will be closing like within days, if not hours. Was Skirmish, Skirmish with 2 R's.
Okay.
Which I think is a pun based on the fact that it's and this is a game based on some sort of anthropomorphic woodland animals fighting kobolds. I'm not a D&D player, so I've never been 100% comfortable with the pronunciation of kobolds. It's a hot. I find it a really unpleasant.
Kobold.
Kobolds, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I inherently find it an unpleasant word to say, but that's just,
Cobbled.
I don't know. Is it like a cobbled street?
A kobold. Yeah. I
Anyway,
mean, there's that game, isn't there? Cobblestones and kobolds, kobold stones and cobbles.
anyway,
Where
that's
were we? Sorry, I'm completely lost.
that aside. So this is a grid-based game, where one side takes a part of a collection of anthropomorphic woodland animals, and the other side is a group of kobolds, and you are trying to complete little mini quests, like whilst fighting the other side. And it very much felt to me like, I think I'm not a player of MOBA games, but is it MOBA, the games where you have like bases and spawn points, and you run through and you get killed multiple times, but you get to like respawn, and and sort of keep coming in again. So
Mhm.
you've got a board with a bunch of spawn points on it, and if someone gets like chased away, they pop back up on the spawn point, like literally next
Nice.
turn. And it's all about sort of completing the quests rather than necessarily inherently battering the seven bells out of the other person, which I think is inherently interesting. Again, frighteningly difficult to balance because every one of the different, because you get these quests, you get a quest randomly, and then you complete that quest, and when you complete it, you get another quest randomly. So it's like the game, to my mind, lives and dies on the balancing of those quests. Because if like a handful of them are just easier than the other ones, things can tip over super quickly. But I love the idea of like the respawning.
Yeah.
Also, the game is based on a box that includes sort of pre-gridded terrain with very
So what's the
specific.
box? Remind me.
Oh, I don't remember the name, the box, but it's a box that, like I say, because it's a I think it's like the D&D, one of the sort of D&D related tactical things. So it
Okay.
comes with like a set of gridded terrain. I'll put the name of the box like running at the bottom of the screen at this point. So it has very specific elevations and gridding within it. So a good deal of the game is to do with the fact that you're playing with a set of terrain where you know that there's going to be 1, 2, 3 elevations, and like getting knocked off an elevation, or like the kobolds can tunnel under the ground and come up somewhere that's at the same elevation or lower than where they tunneled, and in that respect, it puts me in mind of there's a sort of Pokemon tactics game where you like it's a little grid based thing, and then you're like fighting different Pokemon against each other, and you want to punch people off of cliffs so that their little Pokemon splatters to a painful death at the end of it. But I thought the discrete nature of the elevation was really cool. I liked the idea of the asymmetrical forces in it, and the fact that they do seem to have like a bit of theming to the way they work. And
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea of like the quests. I think it's one of those ones that, again, this thing, like, because there's all these asymmetrical forces, you buy the force that you're using, you have these different quests. This one needs to be like play tested and play tested and play tested to get all of that singing. But I think inherently the sort of like rushing around, getting battered, respawning, chasing quests, hitting a quest and then another one popping up immediately, and then like running off after another sort of goal, I think that's all lovely. I think it's for me, it's
I
quite.
think that's one of the things, like, because obviously I've tried a spawning sort of MMO thing, MOBA thing rather, with Mystic Skies. Like, I think one thing that's exciting is it pushes off from the normal arc of I start with lots of dudes, we kill all of our dudes, and we have a couple of dudes at the end, dueling for the final victory points. It just gives a very different texture where um your forces keep coming back, and it's not like fully a thing of attrition. It's more like, where do I knock out, like, you push things forward, I knock them out, which basically knocks them back because they're going to have to respawn from a lower place. So, like, where do I weaken your line in order to give me the time to do the thing? And there's loads of good stuff, and what it is it's a different flavor, it's a different sort of arc to the game. And what it means is that you do have to find a good sharp place for the game to conclude so that you can build towards that exciting conclusion. It's not the, oh, we're all dying, and so there's only a few decisions that matter right at the end kind of exciting conclusion. But it can go on forever. So how does it finish, and also why is it exciting? Why is it at its most exciting just before then?
Yeah, and obviously having the quests, and you win when you've claimed a certain number of quests, and the fact that you can like pop a quest and then get another quest and pop the quest,
Hmm.
and like how long the game is going to be. I see. I think from memory, I literally read it this morning. I think it's like 5 quests, but you could super easily go like, oh, let's play 3 quests, let's play to 7
Right.
quests, etc., etc. And it does mean that there's no issue of like, well, someone you can't get tabled, you can't
Yeah.
get sort of effectively eliminated. You can get like rushed and someone like knock out a few sort of quests, but anything they can do to you on one turn, you can do to them on the next turn. So I think there's a load of things that are really advantageous for a game that's being designed in a short period of time. And I think that they've like, and again, the forces are lovely and really well thought through and sort of imaginative, intelligent. And I think that's where they've really sort of pushed themselves to sort of try and design and balance those forces within a really, really short period of time. It'd be interesting to see where I think this one goes and when it gets tightened up and maybe more forces introduced and expanded and sort of added on to.
Skirmish.
Skirmish, yes. Okay. Look, that has been in these 2 videos 6 of the 100 and something plus games that are in the challenge, which is a you know diminishingly small percentage of the actual entrance. If you have liked the idea of one of these games we've talked about, obviously swing by and check out that particular game in our Discord in the links down there section. But as I said in the last video, there's
But
like
grab a D20 and check out 3 others at random.
yeah, no, absolutely. Or just read the list of names and go, Joust or Accursed or Rad Pirates of the Toxic Seas or whichever of the like odd weird names there grab a hold of you. They're all cool, they're all fun. Spin through the various channels where things are pinned, look at the creativity and brilliance, because like we're talking about the game design side of it, there's some amazing artists, like obscenely good artists that have just like this is yesterday I drew a front cover for it. I'm like, gee, it's ridiculous how talented some people out there are. Swing by, look at the artwork, look at the sculpting, look at the painting, look at the gaming, get involved. It's a lovely community. It's going to be close to closing the design part of the challenge, where by the time this video comes out, but it's then going to go up on Wargames Atlantic's website, where there's going to be a vote, and you can vote for the one that you like best, and the top 3 will win fabulous prizes. And look, don't feel guilty about the fact that you're not going to be able to like go through all of the games and give them a fair shake. Get in there.
We had to pass that guilt marker fairly early on when we realized this was actually getting pretty intense.
Yeah, get in there, test a few of them, vote for one. It doesn't matter that you don't test every single one of them before you vote for one of them. That's going to happen. That's going to even out in the wash. Just pick one that catches your eye, play it, vote for something, get involved. Be part of the community, and they're amazing games. Check.
And thank you if you do. Thank you
absolutely.
on behalf of Malev and us and all the lovely people who've poured their creative energies into their one box war games.
Absolutely. And if the voting is up by the time this video releases, it will obviously be up while this video is about, because that's how the internet works. Tell us which one you voted for and why. Give us some feedback. Tell us which one you think is coolest. Tell us why you gave it your vote and why you think it should and shall and will win and is the finest of all the games. Hit the like and subscribes when you do so. Swing by the Discord and give shout outs to your favorite designers and meet the designers of the game that is your favorite game, because it's going to be in our Discord, and I'm sure if their game is your favorite game, they will enjoy talking to you, because we all like to have our egos patted on the head. But for now, I think from this episode, this Rule of Carnage, it'll be a thank you, goodbye. So goodbye.